artistic director of the Southampton Playhouse, and I'm very excited to be joined today by the director of GAZER, Ryan J. Sloane, as well as the co-writer and star, Ariella Mastroianni. And we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. But first of all, I want to just get a sense of the history of this project because it is such an original uh, work of independent filmmaking, and you can really feel that in the way that the story plays out. Can you talk a little bit about how you all kind of figured out the process of making this movie, since you're not the traditional film school brats that people may be used to?
Yeah, so Ariel and I grew up together in New Jersey. We've known each other for a long time. We've always championed each other, and she always knew that I wanted to make movies. I knew she wanted to star in movies. So around the time of the pandemic, we were reflecting on where we were, where we wanted to be, um, and we were revisiting all these films that we both loved, that we grew up with, films like Carol Reed's The Third Man, and Antonioni's Blow Up, Coppola's The Conversation, De Palma's Blowout, and we decided it was time to make that film. Uh, and our film school, our training was really watching movies and acting classes over the years, theater. Um, and we were looking at how Darren Aronofsky made Pi, how Christopher Nolan made Following, how the Coen brothers made Blood Simple, and we were kind of just like choosing and picking and stealing the things that made sense for us. We didn't have any money really going into this. We just had a story and a bit of grit and a lot of passion. And we knew that we weren't going to give up. That was one thing that Ariel and I agreed on. Ariel was committed to having the same hairstyle for 3 years. Um, and we just, we got people together, friends mainly. And as they were coming on, we were explaining to them the way that we were planning on going about this. Shooting on weekends in April and November, strategically for the setting of the story in New Jersey and the time of year, the changing of seasons, if you will. Um, and it was just, yeah, it was mainly just important that everybody understood what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it. And we weren't necessarily in a rush. Nobody was waiting for this, and in that way it was very liberating.
Yeah, Ariel, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to step into the role of acting and co-writing? It's a very, you don't see that as often as you might think.
Yeah, it was a really fun learning process, I would say, because when you're writing a script, um, the nature of it is you feel like you know everything about the character on the page. You do everything you can to really bring a full life to the page. So by the time we were writing, or I finished writing, I thought there was everything there is to know about Frankie on the page. So I felt like part of my acting work was done. But it was so exciting because once we started to work on Frankie and actually bring her into a physical space, I realized there was still so much more to discover, and that was surprising. And I realized that it was the first time I could see how well the difference between the written word and then the space between the words, and the space between the written words is actually where you fill in the character, the space between the action lines. And that was yeah, that was really fun to discover. It gave me a whole new reverence for both the writing process and the acting process as two very distinct processes.
But also, Ariel was also calling in lunch in between takes, so she was also acting as a producer, and splitting her mind between Frankie and producing and helping to keep everything on track. So
Yes.
Al- Almost as much of a sort of psychological confusion as the characters enduring in the movie to be that kind of
exactly.
multi hyphenate.
Oh, for sure. I mean, as tired and as like down and out as Frankie was on screen, I mean, I was just leaning into it. I was like, all right, I'm exhausted. I'll let Frankie take over from here.
I love that. So, you mentioned some of these movies like Memento or Pi, where you know you're sort of as a viewer inside the psychological disorientation of the character. What kind of challenges does that create in terms of, from a storytelling standpoint, from writing to directing, so that even if it's sometimes hard to tell what's going on, there's still some enough clarity for the audience to follow the story and understand at the end of the day the basics of what happened.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, since this is told from the perspective of Frankie, I think the entire time that Ariella and I were writing, as I was directing Ariella, as she was doing her prep work as an actor, as I was doing my prep work as a director, I kind of like used my storyboarding. I storyboarded the whole film, and that process is really tied to my prep work as a director, because I'm deciding pretty much where the camera is going to be going, what the framing is going to be, what's happening within the framing, and making sure that it makes sense to the story. And everything, again, is told through Frankie's perspective. So I think, like, psychologically, you know, uh, we made a decision early on that out in the real world, we would follow this very, like, French New Wave, Aronofsky's The Wrestler, handheld, following the character from behind, from the front kind of thing. Inside Frankie's apartment, where she feels safe, the camera's still handheld, but it doesn't move anymore. It doesn't pan, it doesn't tilt. It just stays still on Frankie. And then in the nightmare sequences, these bits of Frankie's past that she's still trying to reconcile with, we went on Steadicam and sticks, and we went for this very Lynchian, Kubrickian kind of symmetrical experience. So it really unsettled the audience, and also, really pushed Frankie's psychological place at the moment.
Yeah, and I would say too, what her condition gave us was a really clear window into her emotional state. And I think that's what drew us to the condition in general. We came across a couple of firsthand accounts and then spoke to some neurologists after. But really, the through line was how lonely it was to live with a condition like that. And I think the loneliness and this idea of Frankie trying to kind of live the rest of her life as a ghost, um, then further went into this voyeur territory. And then that voyeurism allowed us to, like Ryan said, see everything through Frankie's perspective. So you are uncovering this mystery with her, which was really fun. But then the challenge is, the obstacles are when her dyschronometria, kicks in and disrupts that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating too, because of course one of the narrative through lines in the movie is listening to these voiceovers. What was that process like for you? I assume you weren't always listening to the exact same things that we see her listening to in the movie, right?
There were times where I was listening to the directions, and then times that I wasn't. Ryan and I, we had a very, very limited amount of film because we were self-financing it. So, like Ryan said, we had to be very specific about exactly what we were getting, and that's where his storyboards really came into play. We never or rarely ran full scenes. Ryan was very particular about, okay, this I want in a close up, this I want in a two shot. So we would do a lot of camera rehearsals so we could feel the flow. And he made sure that we were all very comfortable and not just, diving into something kind of disoriented. So, yeah, we would do a lot of rehearsals, and that was very helpful. But we only really got what we needed. So for that reason, there were times where I had to hit very specific marks, and we had a very specific limited amount of film. So if I was listening to the directions, I would be worried that I would miss my cue, or there was just no room for error. So on those, I didn't really listen to anything. But the times where I'm, seated in a place, and like on the bus, for example, and I'm looking at the mother and child on the bus, that's where I listened to some of the tape directions to get into that zone. But I wasn't worried about, hitting a mark or missing a cue. So yeah, we kind of played with both.
You alluded to something earlier that I want to get into a bit more, which is shooting on film. Not the easiest route when you're making a low budget movie these days, but of course one that has a great tradition. So, why the decision to shoot on film, and what kind of learning curve was there for you on that front?
Well, all the films that I grew up watching and that I love and adore were shot on film. So it's kind of like there's this connection to my idea of cinema being connected to celluloid and film grain and that kind of visual style. So there wasn't really. I didn't give anyone another option. Like even when we brought Mateus Bastos, our good friend Maddie, on to shoot the film, you know, I just told him right away we're shooting on film. So make sure that you're comfortable, make sure that you're ready, and I knew that he would be because he's such a well studied person. He went and did his research and was prepared. But I think that it really the story really lent itself to that 16 millimeter grain, capturing New Jersey the way that it is now before it's, I mean, a lot of the places that we shot at have been knocked down and they've put up apartment buildings. Everything's being gentrified. And one thing that was very important to us was to capture home before it's changed so much that we can't recognize it. And capturing it on film, it's just there's something living and breathing about film. When you watch something that was shot on film, it's the film grain and the structure of the grain. It's literally dancing across the screen in a way that isn't. It's not on a loop. And anything digital where they just put film grain over it, it's typically on a loop, and you can see, that it's just there's something fake about it. Yeah, I love film, and I know this isn't a film to versus digital conversation, but it's
It can
I'm
be.
very
I
passionate.
mean, that is
It can be.
talking about, right? I mean, there must have been points in time given the limit. I mean, it's one thing if you're shooting like a big studio movie, but where like the camera jams or something, you're like, man, if we just had the
Right.
Alexa here, or
Yeah.
like the red camera, we could have just rolled it back and it wouldn't be a big deal.
Well, what's so amazing about film, I actually think that you have more potential issues with a digital camera, and even in terms of money, like you spend all this money on like memory cards and storage, and you'll end up racking up about the same if you're
Hmm.
obviously you can shoot for forever on a digital camera. That's honestly like the bigger dynamic range in terms of you can better with low light, but like I feel like film though is like what you're getting. It's math. You're measuring the light. And you're like, okay, this is what my image is going to look like.
Yeah.
Um, and as long as like the film lab is on top of their game, which we went with Color Lab down in Maryland, who were incredible and very helpful. If you know the lenses that you're using are high quality, we went with Arri. We told them what we needed, what we wanted to do. They were very helpful and very accommodating. You can trust the medium, and it won't let you down. There's that story of Nolan shooting Dunkirk, and the IMAX camera fell off the plane and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. When they pulled up the magazine, it was still usable. If that was a digital camera,
Oh,
that footage is gone.
I actually didn't realize that.
Yeah,
I didn't know
Amazing.
that.
yeah. They
That's very cool.
used it in the film. They just had to clean it
Wow.
up with get rid of some of the salt. But
That's wild. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good to know that celluloid can survive the apocalypse better than.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
And I will say too, like in terms of our budget, I think it's also how you compromise and how you prepare. Um, I think we had a lot of time to prepare in the way that we shot it, but that really allowed us to on set be very specific and tight with how we shot. And I think sometimes you can have that discipline either way, but sometimes when you're shooting film it can be a little looser in terms of you can make mistakes and we can fix it. But with film, and especially self-financing, everyone on our set was on their game, like on their game, because they knew if we messed up one thing,
it could cripple us.
it would have crippled us. Yeah. It would have taken months to save up money. Yeah, they would have been very bad. So I love that. I love that energy. I love that focus.
And the excitement, right? Like a lot of the people on our set, I'd say probably 95% of them, they never shot on film before. So everybody was very excited to, take on the challenge and reach that bar.
Yeah. And then, like I said, like in terms of compromise, like we didn't have a lot of gear. So where I guess you would spend money on more gear, we didn't. So we just transferred that to film. And that's how we were able to keep our budget low. So I think it's, people are scared of the costs of shooting on film. But I think if you're prepared and you kind of figure out where you can compromise, it didn't make a difference to us budget wise.
That's an amazing point. So, and the other thing is budgetarily, there are things in this movie that I think will surprise people because if you think you have it figured out, it's this sort of lo-fi operation, and then you go places certainly with like this nightmarish sequence that take it to the next level. So, without spoiling something for someone who hasn't seen the movie, I want to talk about this flesh box and where that idea came from and what the process was like in terms of making something like that.
I love the flesh box. What I love even more about the flesh box is it seems to be the deciding point for audiences,
Yeah,
whether or not they stay or
Yeah.
go.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm so proud of that.
There was one Letterboxd review where they were like, I don't know, I think he's kind of cute. So it's fun. I love the nightmare sequences so much. I think it's such a, even though they're very surreal, I actually think it's the most honest representation of what Frankie is going through. And I love using genre for that reason. Genre can elevate this idea of truth, right? Just through a different lens. Frankie in those sequences is at the same time remembering these past events, but also discovering them through the dreamscape. And that was really fun for me as an actor as well, coming into a space and at once feeling very familiar, but also very foreign. And Ryan and Maddie did such a great job at visualizing those sequences in terms of the really, really strong contrast between Frankie's internal life and external life with the use of color. They pushed the film. There's this, it's so like orange and warm, but it's like you're in her home and it's warm and it should be inviting, but it's so haunting as well. And I love all of that within those sequences. But the flesh box, everything that she discovers or remembers in those sequences relate to an actual event that happened that night, and they relate to actual physical things in the room. It's just as she's processing it through the lens of it being a very terrifying moment for her. But yes, the flesh box correlates to something very real within her home. That what I love so much, she pulls out the umbilical cord, but what's contained in the box. So it's like she is remembering the birth of her daughter, but what's inside the box is more sinister, and that correlates to the death of her husband. So you really have this death-life contrast that's so present.
That's an amazing way of explaining it. So,
Yeah, beautiful.
so a year ago or thereabouts, when this movie was going to the Cannes Film Festival, I saw that you were saying that this is basically the first part of a trilogy. So how's that going, and where do you see kind of your trajectories as a filmmaking team now that you've had this starting point as an experience?
It's so interesting because we came into this and we're still in this in the same way. We're like, we before Cam, with everything with Gazer, we didn't know anybody. We didn't go to film school. We had no connections, no industry connections. And in a big way, we just kept using the term ultra violence and punk rock. That's been like our energy. It's like nobody can tell us no. Nobody can tell us what to do or how to do it. And while we were making this film, we started conceptualizing the next film, and we put in a little Easter egg in one shot on a billboard in the background for the next film for a company that's very prominent in the next picture. And it's funny because like over the year I personally have been kind of dealing with some confidence issues. Just like, it's been such a whirlwind and life has been so up and down, and Ariella and I have been having a lot of heart to hearts and just like trying to, pick each other back up and get back to that like fuck it energy, because the reality is like, we're writing this next film. We're madly in love with it. Can't wait to there are sequences that both of us have never seen on film before. We're so excited. And it's like there's a version of this film that we want to do for a specific budget, right? That is much bigger than Gazer, But then there's still that like fuck it punk rock energy that Ariel and I keep reminding each other. It's like, nope. If tomorrow everyone's like, listen, guys,
We're
you
sick
had
of
your
you.
run.
Yeah.
We're tired of you. We're gonna go back to the IPs and sequels. We're not gonna champion this kind of stuff. We'd say, good, go fuck yourself. We're gonna go make another movie. Because nobody can stop us, and that's
Yeah.
the beauty of it. And I hope that anybody listening and any filmmakers out there feel that for themselves. It's like, don't wait for anybody to tell you you can and can't do something. And you don't need millions of dollars. You need probably close to 100,000 apparently, but you can take a big idea. There's so many locations in Gazer. There's even like the practical effects and stuff like that, and shooting on film. It's like, it's a miracle that we did it the way that we did it for the budget we did it at. But I think it's just proof that you can do things for a reasonable amount of money.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that you can have is just a group of people who really are working towards the same vision, who you trust, and who have your back on the days that are really bad. By the 2.5 year mark,
Yeah.
Ryan and I were
Depressed.
yeah, very, very, really deep in the woods. And every time we came back together with our crew, we always just reminded each other that it should be fun. And I really think that that's the most important thing, just surrounding yourself with people who can keep that energy alive and that love alive when things get so, I don't know, when you get lost.
Dark, yeah.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, I think.
But yes, it is. This is part of a trilogy.
Yeah.
Good way to answer that question. Super exciting. So that's awesome. Thank you for talking about this, and I hope people can use this as context when they see the movie, because it's nice to have the sort of the personality behind a movie like this. It really helps establish the passion that got it made.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this. Those are great questions.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.